Okay, we are recording and we are live, and so I'll go ahead and get started. And I do appreciate those of you who are already starting to turn your mics or to type in the chat, because I think discussion helps richen our conversation. So I am Nichole Huff. I am faculty member in the School of Human Environmental Sciences. And I am also the Extension Specialist for Family Finance and Resource Management with Kentucky Cooperative Extension. So we run an initiative in Family and Consumer Sciences Extension called MoneyWise. And so generally, I do workshops focused on finances or managing your resources, but I do have extreme interest in other types of resources that we manage besides our finances. And so things like our time and our energy and our relationships, these are all part of the resources that we manage. And our workplace relationships are part of that, right? It helps us as we consider our human capital, how valuable are we to a workforce, and then do we fit in our workplace? And empathy goes a long way for making us feel both valued in our workplace, but if we are a leader, and I saw some of you in the chat mention that you were, and so in how you manage other working relationships, learning how to have empathy can really foster a healthy dynamic. And so we're going to talk about that. And so my background, I'm coming at this as a family therapist. And so I like to look at the intersection between mental health and then that financial, that resource management help, because we know that our livelihood is multifaceted. And so empathy is something that I think is really needed. I use it in the classroom with my students. I know that I need empathy from my colleagues and my supervisors, and I try to extend it whenever possible, because it's hard to multitask in today's world. And the past couple of years have really exacerbated that. And we know it's not over, right? And so I had to ask for empathy this morning from a colleague, because I had to say, hey, I'm hanging on by a thread. For any of you who followed along with the Productivity Monday series, we just talked about work-life balance. And as we are all trying to balance this, and I'll revisit this concept in just a moment, it can make us strained and stressed, and it can make it really hard to navigate. But we're all doing that. And so we're all managing these roles that we bring with us into the workplace. We bring the stress with us into the workplace, and it can make our interactions with one another really important. All right, so I want to start off. So if you will, put in the text chat, how would you define empathy? Like what is empathy to you? Okay, putting yourself in others' shoes, identifying with how others feel, listening, trying to understand what others are going through and how they're feeling, being able to see a situation from another's perspective. Yes, a lot of perspective taking, not passing judgment, right? So really considering how someone else would feel and react without judgment. Well, you guys have summarized the whole webinar. So patient, right? Exercising patience. And when our patience is thin, and oftentimes the stress that we bring into the workplace is not even indicative of work-related stress, right? Because we are juggling multiple roles. And so patience, listening, active listening, perspective taking is all part of that. And we'll continue to talk about that. And so, yes, empathy is it's the ability to understand or share in someone else's feelings, this perspective taking. It is a skill. And so some of us may be better at it than others. If we are an empath, and if we are better at it than others, somebody mentioned emotional fatigue, right? I suffer from that sometimes, trying to be so empathic that sometimes I'll snap because I want my needs met, right? And I want to feel valued as well. But empathy is reciprocal, and it is a skill, and it requires both emotional intelligence and social awareness. So it is, it's that ability to read a room or to notice if a coworker, a colleague, if a student, if your faculty, if somebody is going something, it's that ability to read the room, to tie in and tune in to the emotions and emotional states of others. It's listening if they give you those cues that, hey, I'm hanging on by a thread. And that was a quote that I said to a colleague this morning, because some maintenance issues and a locked door that I needed to get into, and I was already headed into class, and it was just crazy. But what my colleague didn't know, my shortness that came across, was because I had been up all night with a sick kid. The third kid who has fallen victim, I have just three, but it has felt like many more this week, to a virus that we cannot seem to shake, a stomach virus at that. So my colleague had no idea that I was bringing this into my frantic, having to move mountains to come to campus today. And so not being able to get into my office was that straw that was ready to break my back, as that figurative camel. And so I had to say, I'm sorry that I'm frustrated. I just need some empathy. I'm hanging on by a thread. And I had to share what was going on so that my colleague realized it wasn't her, it was the situation. I was frustrated by the situation because of other things that were going on. And so we'll talk about how communication plays into that. And so, pairing that emotional intelligence, that social awareness and realizing that it's a skill that can be refined. And, having empathy helps us understand those thoughts and feelings, even if it's not us, right? And it gets hard at work, especially because we need to do a job. And the more that we rely on others to get our job done, the harder it can be. Somebody put the word patient in the chat. And when we deal with others, and sometimes if everybody's got something going on, it feels like there's a line between an excuse and an explanation, right? And but my rule of thumb is I would rather overextend empathy than not extend it if someone truly needs it. Because we know that there are probably times when we needed it and others didn't extend it, and that can lead to frustration. All right, so we touched on this. And so what does an empathic person look like? So someone that is, that demonstrates empathy and does it well. And you mentioned many of this in the chat, but this idea of perspective seeking, that we put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And so when I was having my dialogue, which was very ironic that I was doing a webinar shortly after on empathy in the workplace, but we were having a dialogue. Turns out this colleague was at home sick too, and a similar thing is going. And so we were both frustrated because we were balancing work and home. And so but having a conversation, we were able to say, yeah, that stresses me out. I can empathize with that. I'm going through that too. But even if we weren't, even if you share something or someone shares something with you and it's not your situation, it's trying to focus on how someone else would feel and react. How would you feel and react if you were up all night with a sick kid, or meeting a deadline, or locked out of something, or just cumulative stresses, right? Usually it is the little things that cause us to react in a way that is not always patient and kind. And so empathy helps us put the focus on somebody else. And it's not just for those challenging situations. Now, often that's when we need to exercise it the most, is during the challenging situations. But it's also part of empathy is just taking an interest in others, taking an interest in your coworkers, knowing that your coworker has 3 children. And so even though you don't see those, you know, those responsibilities, but that person is bringing that system into the workplace. And so understanding some of the dynamics, and then celebrating the successes too. So empathy is not just relating to challenging situations, but it's being happy for a colleague if they have a success at work or at home, but it's sharing in both joys and challenges. And really it is putting that focus on someone else. Okay, so why is having workplace empathy so important? And so I've seen some of this, and you can add if you've got other things to add, or you didn't, you know, chime in at the first of the hour. Why is this important to you? So some of you mentioned employee retention and wanting to help with employee engagement, but why else is having workplace empathy so important? What makes this crucial? Probably more now than it has been. Yeah, it creates a positive work environment. It offers support for colleagues. We are all human. I think we forget that, right? We are just human. We are doing the best we can. And I think that admitting that sometimes our vulnerability is okay, and it helps to humanize us. Yeah, patients can feel empathy as well. It's the same. So if you have patients or clients or students or colleagues, but there's a reciprocity there. People are so incredibly stressed, right? Everyone is so stressed. And this is cumulative. So mental health, yes. Collective trauma, so real. These are fantastic comments. Collective trauma feels more like a team. Yes. And so we are on the tail end of a pandemic where life was uprooted. I have to remind myself, some of my students right now who are freshmen have never experienced, you know, they haven't been in a classroom in a really long time, or their whole worlds have been flipped upside down. And I remind myself of being intentional about perspective taking, because there's a lot to be said about this idea of collective trauma. And so with my team and with everything, because even though we are not in the middle of the pandemic like we were, many of us are still battling things. Like right now, sicknesses and viruses are going crazy, right? Because we're not sheltering in place and wearing masks and sanitizing like we were. So some of these things like the stomach virus and the flu are rearing up right now. My youngest son's school is closed. He is now well. He was the first to bring this home, but on top of managing 2 other sick kids, now we have childcare for one who is healthy. But I am not the exception. This is the rule of how do I, and luckily for me, I can balance. I can work from home when I need to, and not often. And I have a supportive co-parent. My husband and I, we were able to flex, but that is not always the case. And even with the 2 of us right now, it's taking us both to make it all work. And so I often, as I put myself in somebody's shoes, what about the person who's not able, who doesn't have a support system, who has used all of their sick days, or is caring for an aging parent, or is you know, has a relationship that they may be navigating that has some challenges, or has health issues of their own. And we could, you know, spend a whole discussion about all of the things that can you know, accumulate to make us all on the verge of just mental breakdown. And so having empathy does promote that teamwork. And so as we have this discussion of work-life balance, and this is something that I discussed in that productivity series, but it's worth mentioning with empathy, because we know when we look at these scales, this is not reality. It's not a balanced scale. And so work-life balance is sometimes it's like this for the work, and sometimes it's like this for the life, and sometimes it's like this all day long. And so work-life balance comes when over time there is balance. But being able to flex and fluctuate as your needs and priorities shift is really important. And it's important to empathy and to understand this idea that we are employees, but we are humans. And so whether you, again, wherever you fall on your reporting chart, because most of us report to someone, and then we have others who we are reported to. And so there are different roles, but remembering that we are all just humans, and most humans are doing the best they can to meet the priorities in their life, right? Some of us do it better than others, and some days we do it better than others. But when we are looking at ways to buffer employee burnout, what research tells us is that having a healthy work-life balance is the #1 indicator of being happy on the job, preventing burnout. And so, more than our experience or our expertise, and part of workplace stress is how, empathic are our supervisors, are our colleagues. Is this understanding that I am human, or is there an expectation that I am a machine without family or outside obligations, without interests or hobbies, or a life apart from my job? And so the World Health Organization defines chronic workplace stress as consistent stress, toxic stress that is not managed. And so as we are looking for how can we encourage employee productivity, how can we engage our employees, reduce burnout, promote wellness, one way that we can do that is to recognize our humanity. Burnout is some symptoms of that are energy depletion and exhaustion, negative feelings towards our job, reduced professional productivity. And so those are things that happen over time, and empathy can help buffer some of this burnout. Because we know that when we have empathy in the workplace, it does build those office relationships. It improves communication and collaboration between colleagues. And so very little of my work is done independently. I have independent responsibilities, but I am a part of a larger team in much that I do. And for me to be a good colleague, I have to have communication, and I have to be able to collaborate. And so having communication, knowing, for example, there is empathy on my team, allowed me to say, hey, hanging on by a thread, you're frustrated, I'm frustrated, let's talk about this. But because we're a part of a team, we could do that. And I sensed her frustration, she sensed my frustration, and we were able to communicate. And we'll talk about some active listening tips for that. That's not always the case, though. That was a good example of it working out. But we have all been there, right, where we have tried to express ourselves and we're shut down. And we know how that feels. And there have been places that I have worked, not here, thankfully, but places that I have worked in other universities where there was toxicity, there was not empathy, and I ended up leaving. And that would be what studies would show us, that people leave for toxic work environments. And that's not the only reason, but it is a reason. So it does increase, empathy increases productivity. And we'll talk about some tips for that and how we can have more productive meetings by practicing a little more empathy. I mean, it also can foster a sense of purpose in your work. And so you care more about your job when you know that somebody cares about your role in that position, and not just about your output, but about who you are and how you contribute. And it does promote that balance. Okay, so how do we increase workplace empathy? And I've mentioned some of these things, but there are other specific things that we're going to mention. But as we think through, I want you to think of like picture one colleague or supervisor that's kind of your go-to, your sounding board. What do you appreciate most about how they demonstrate empathy to you? So what are some of those qualities that you appreciate in someone that shows you empathy at work? How does it make us feel when someone shows us empathy? Yeah, so there's a trust. That's a really good comment. There's a trust there that you have the competency to do your job in spite of an outside or competing obligation. So they care, they appreciate when you, so expressing appreciation. Yeah, absolutely. So that's like the joys and challenges, right? So it's not just about challenges. So feeling like they understand, they care. They give you room to breathe, they give you autonomy. So we appreciate sometimes colleagues and supervisors that don't micromanage. They recognize and they show you that you're valued, that you're not a robot. They go to bat for you. Yes, that is empathy. Is we rally for those on our team. Yeah. So room to breathe, care, understanding, care. I'm seeing that a lot. Appreciation. They understand life happens. They trust you to get the job done. Kindness, listening. You feel seen. You feel heard. These are really great things. And I ask you this because I'm going to remind you, especially as we close, that part of showing empathy is being the colleague or the supervisor that you wish you had. And I try, and it is active. It is a skill that I work on often. And if I realize that I have flubbed it up, if I am short with somebody that works, that reports to me, or that somebody I report to, a colleague of any kind, and I realize, okay, I didn't handle that great. I say that. I'm so sorry. I did not handle that how I should have. Or I say, thank you for your patience with me because I didn't handle that as best I could. But yeah, so when we remember what it is we appreciate for others who have shown it to us, we are more able to model that and show that to others. So active listening is a big part. It is feeling heard and then working to hear. And so it is working to improve both your listening and your observation skills, because we talk with much more than just our mouths, right? We talk with our body language. We talk with our attention. We have verbal and nonverbal cues that are part of the messages we send to others. And so being more socially observant, being more empathic means you're actively listening for everything. It is a two-way dialogue, and it can be hard because we still do a lot of virtual, and it can be really hard when there is not always opportunities for dialogue. But as our teams are returning to normal, or if you are still navigating the virtual space for work and home, it's promoting interaction. And so active listening is not nodding, being on your phone, multitasking at your computer, but it's listening. It's that eye contact. It is that, tell me more, or, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. What did you do? But it is having a conversation. Active listening could also be showing that observation skill. I see that you're frustrated. Is everything okay? And so showing that you are both listening and observing. Right, so this idea of how to actively listen and how are ways we can actively listen, is not thinking ahead. And this may be reminders for some of you, but I know that it is good reminders. Let's see, treat it as an equal, directness, asking me how I'm doing, how I'm feeling. I'm reading some from the text chat, some more responses that came in. Treat it as an equal, right? And so that respect is also extremely reciprocal. Building on what someone else said, they ask how things are going and when your family is going through something, right? And so active listening in that interest, it is not a one and done kind of thing, but it is part of showing you care is asking again. How are you doing now? Or when you know something, how did that go? And it's part of building teamwork, asking about follow-up. So when we're in a conversation with someone, part of active listening is not anticipating what's coming down the road. So what a speaker might say or how you should respond, because we do that, right? Especially in heated moments, or if we have, probably nobody on this call, right? But we mentioned in the text chat, sometimes we have colleagues or employees that are not always the easiest to deal with. And so when we go into a conversation guarded, we're sometimes worried about how we're going to respond or how someone else is, what we're going to say next, how we're going to rebuke something instead of just listening. And so active listening is not projecting, not thinking ahead, but focusing instead on the person speaking, asking insightful questions, taking on that curious mindset, like, especially if something hasn't happened to you, if you can't relate, or if you're not really interested, it's asking questions to express curiosity so that your colleague can know, hey, tell me more about that. But asking questions that demonstrate that you really do care. And that is part of the skill we develop so that it does come from a genuine place. It doesn't feel like a role that you've rehearsed in an HR workshop, right? We never want it to be disingenuine, but the more we practice active listening, the more we exhibit empathy, the more we refine our skill and our ability to empathize. And so listening to what it said, watching for those nonverbal cues. Okay, and we don't always agree, right? Like if we're a part of a team, there's chances you're good and we have respect to speak our minds, or we don't always see eye to eye. We get frustrated with one another. We have different points of view. And so part of active listening is disagreeing with respect. And so showing respect rather than debating or pointing out errors or trying to win the conversation. So it's not yes, but like active listening is not yes, butting. It is, okay, I see your point of view. I don't know that I agree with your point of view, but let me hear you out. Maybe I can see things from your point of view if you explain it to me. Or I can see you are not agreeing with what I'm saying. And so pointing out that you see that, and then having that conversation about, can I explain to you where I'm coming from, and asking for room within that conversation to disagree with respect, to hear opposing viewpoints, to entertain. Yes, we'll see in the chat. When we think we are treating everyone the same, nonverbal and legitimate anticipations of receiving negative feedback, it still comes out. Yeah, it can still come out. And so we are communicating, even silence communicates. And so we can communicate verbally and non-verbally. And so active listening is having productive conversations. They entertain opposing viewpoints. And that might be where you can say, okay, I know this conversation isn't productive. Let's revisit this. We'll brainstorm it a little more. and come back to this. Or it's knowing, part of active listening is knowing to receive and respond to these verbal and nonverbal cues to know when to take a step back and revisit a conversation. Okay, so I mentioned that empathy is another skill that can help with productivity. And so listening and actively listening can help with empathy, but empathy can also help with productivity. And one way we can do this is to show that we value others' time. And it is a small thing in professional etiquette, but there is a correlation between that and how we feel valued and how we show that we value others. And so meetings are a good example, right? Like seeing the coffee cup and the ribbon that are like, that email, that meeting could have been an email. And then when the pandemic forced us all over to Zoom, it was, how many Zoom meetings can we hold in a day? We're having meetings just to have meetings. And so whether they're virtual, whether they're face-to-face, it's empathy is realizing how valuable a commodity our time is. And everybody appreciates when their time and their effort are valued. And so part of demonstrating empathy is valuing people's time and valuing their effort. And so this has come up in the text chat, but appreciating jobs well done, noticing effort, noticing time if a project takes a while, but saying, I know this took a long time, I appreciate your effort on that. And then with our meetings, being prepared. And because it leads to collaboration and innovation. When you go in, I have had to learn to make agendas for meetings. That doesn't come naturally for me. But especially when I am leading the meeting, then we may not need an hour. We may not need 30 minutes. We can tackle the task at hand when I have planned well, whether it is a student meeting, a one-on-one meeting, a small team meeting, or a large team meeting. But when we value, even if you are meeting with a colleague, a supervisor, an employee, whether you have a game plan so that you can say, I know your time is valuable. We're all really busy. These are what we need to tackle. But it'll increase your productivity. It'll increase your collaboration. It paves the way for innovation. And it really indicates that you care about your work and you care about everyone's time. All right, and some ways that we can boost our emotional intelligence. So we've talked about a few of these. So the improving our communication skills, learning how to resolve conflict. Of course, this whole workshop is on being more empathic. But some other ways that we can boost our emotional intelligence. The first is understanding yourself, and okay. Am I not the easiest colleague and coworker to get along with? Am I forceful with my opinions? Am I short-tempered? For me, I am often super easygoing until that straw breaks my back and I snap because I have been so easygoing that I can blow up. But I recognize that. I recognize things about how I interact with others, how triggers for me. And things that make me kind of defensive in the workplace. Also understand how I handle stress. And like right now, I recognize I might be at the end of my rope. I might need to really carve out time to reboot, rejuvenate, rest, recalibrate so that I am a better colleague. And so understanding ourselves can help us boost emotional intelligence because we may not realize how we contribute to that narrative and how we contribute to our workplace environment. And so paying attention to other people, and again, and part of that is not just when you're in a conversation, but truly paying attention to other people. Are they down the hall? Have you seen them in a while? Have you really had a conversation? Do you know anything about them after hours? Are you having conversations about where your kids are applying for college. Think back to a conversation that Zeta and I have had recently. But are you in this world of Zoom and quick actions? Are we taking the time to pay attention to what others are saying? And then are we investing in our relationships? And that goes back to that one. Every time I make time for coffee or a lunch or something that is less formal, when I am on, because the work-life balance is so real, we can put that to the wayside. We can say, I need to work, I need to be a robot because I have stuff I need to get done because I'm trying to balance work and home obligations. But part of empathy in the workplace is investing in your relationships, is knowing what's going on with colleagues and coworkers and employees. Okay, so social awareness is part of this, and how we can use our empathy skills to read people in meetings. Now, this type of webinar is hard because I see names and little blocks, but if this were a two-way conversation and we were in a meeting and I could look and see, okay, who is confused right now? Who is upset? Who might be put off by what I'm saying? Who is bored? I can tell right away which students are very bored with what I had to say. Or if I'm doing a community outreach workshop and you know who is distracted, who's distracted by their phones, who's listening. But when we're more socially aware of what's going on, we can read the room. We can know if everybody looks confused, if everybody seems disinterested, and it can help us have that conversation. It makes it easier to understand how people are responding to you. And so you can help calibrate too, again, this idea of both social awareness, but also self-awareness. And empathy requires both. It requires us to have social observation skills, but also to be aware of how we contribute to that narrative, because it does help us gain perspective. And so it might sound like, is everything okay? I am so sorry. How can I help? What can I do to help? If it's okay, we'll figure this out. And so my daughter, who got sick yesterday, it was opening night for a play that her theater group has been. She is a sophomore in high school and they have been practicing for months, and it was opening night and she is throwing up. And so it was hard to contact that director, her theater director, and say, what do we do? Because you don't want to get the cast sick, and how. And I was so grateful for his response. Both because it showed her empathy, but it showed us, and I know it was disappointing. It was the call he does not want to get, but he said, it's okay. We'll figure this out together. We will figure it out. It's okay. And so, if we hear news from a colleague in the workplace and it means, oh gosh, we're without a speaker last minute. Somebody has canceled for a shift and now your workload has risen. But it is extending sometimes empathy in those situations where it puts us in a bind, but realizing that perspective taking is, it is okay, we will figure this out together. And so that might be how it sounds in conversation. This idea of tell me more, so tell me more about that. I'm so sorry I can't relate, but let me know what you're going through. And then just as we wrap up, what research really shows us is that empathy is contagious. There is a social multiplier effect to empathy. When we receive it, we are more likely to give it. When we give it, that person is more likely to extend it to somebody else. There's that pay it forward mentality, right? And so when we experience empathy, we often share it. It is contagious, but so is toxicity, right? When we don't extend it, when we don't receive it, then we are more likely to be short with someone else. And I had a former boss tell me one time, not at this university, this university, not at this one, but that that when she was coming along, it was a female, and that she just had to figure it out, the work-life balance with her kids, and she just had to figure it out, and that today's moms just want it all, and so it was an actual conversation, right? That toxicity, because she didn't receive empathy when she was coming through her appointment. She was not about to extend it to the new generation of faculty who were coming through. What it didn't do is it created a lot of turnover there, because it didn't recognize, and that goes back to our conversation about burnout. And that's an example. And I'm sure if we were together, we'd all have those examples, right? Of somebody, like bitterness begets bitterness, and but empathy also begets empathy. And so when we become that coworker, that employee, that boss that we wish we had, we are a better contributor to the team. And so, you know, be the boss, the employee, the colleague you wish you had. All right, so someone who cares, someone who listens, but someone who responds with respect, with courtesy, with empathy, with a teamwork mentality. Not the greatest news in the world. We'll figure it out. It'll go a long way. All right, so that is all I have for you. That's all I have for you today. So Azetta will send out the recording. There is a publication to go around to this, and part of the empathy is the seeing systems, is realizing that even if the hull isn't in our end of the boat, we're in the boat together, and if we want our teams to stay afloat, is extending empathy will go a long way. All right, that is what I have for you today. Happy to answer any questions or hear any comments about anything. Appreciate y'all all coming today, spending your lunch hour with me.